Support for Trifles comes from the BSI Press. Manuscripts, collections of papers by international writers, and books covering a wide range of other Sherlockian topics. Find them online at bakerstreetirregulars.com. And by listeners like you, who choose to support us on Patreon for as little as $1 a month. Patreon.com/trifles.
Welcome to Trifles, a weekly podcast about the Sherlock Holmes stories.
It is, of course, a trifle, but there is nothing so important as trifles.
Yes, the band was speckled and there were 6 Napoleons, but there are so many other details to pick apart in the stories.
Pray, be precise as to details.
You know the plots, but what about the minutiae? Have you ever stopped to wonder about why Dr. Watson was called James by his wife? Or of Sherlock Holmes's dining habits? Or what happened when he let a criminal escape?
You are very inquisitive, Mr. Holmes.
It is my business to know what other people don't know.
Scott Monty and Burt Wolder will have the answers to these questions and more in Trifles.
The game's afoot.
Episode 291, The Four Violets. Hello and welcome to Trifles, the Sherlock Holmes podcast where we talk about the details in the stories. I'm Scott Monty.
I'm Burt Wolder.
And Burt, are you ready for some violence?
I am, absolutely. A crime of violins. Oh, wait a minute, that's violins.
Wait, viola, violin, violet, violence?
No.
Was that the four violets we were talking about?
Look, you can't put a cello under your chin, so you're gonna stick with a string instrument. It really has to be a violin.
Well, given the number of chins I have, there's no room under there for cellos. Well, if you would like the show notes for this episode, they are available at ihose.co/trifles291. If there are any links we talk about, previous episodes, or other nuggets that we think you should partake in, that is where you can find them. Of course, you can just find them on whatever podcast player you're listening to us on. Just check your notes section, and there should be notes there as well. But again, it's ihose.co/trifles291. This is the last show of the month, which means we have a drawing after our discussion. Stay tuned for that. And if you'd like to be eligible for these drawings on a regular basis, just support us on Patreon. A link is available in the show notes as well as at patreon.com/trifles. Well, this is going to be interesting because a couple of episodes ago, I think I mentioned that we were inspired by a listener and put out a call for other listeners to inspire us with content. And if you do, if we take one of your examples of a Trifles episode that you would like to see, and we use it on the air, well, then we'll give you a prize from the Sherlock Holmes vaults. Well, I am pleased to say that this has paid off in no time. Tony Coffey has come up with a suggestion, which is this episode, The Four Violets. He says there are 4 female characters in the canon with the name Violet. I think it would be interesting to discuss them, including comparing them and perhaps researching why Doyle used this name so often. Well, thank you very much, Tony, for the suggestion. We will be in touch with your prize, but we thought it was a really interesting topic. And we looked through our archives, and in fact, we did not cover the 4 Violets previously, which I thought was amazing. We're 6 seasons in now, and we haven't covered what I thought would have been a very obvious topic, and certainly Tony did as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's a very good suggestion. And so what happened was we consulted, as you said, our copious research resources and found out that a great Sherlockian and writer, Sonia Featherston, has walked down this path somewhat in advance of us. In fact, in September 1997, in the Baker Street Journal, Volume 47, Number 3, Sonia published a wonderful paper called The Language of Violets. And that's what we're going to be talking about as we respond to Tony's suggestion today.
Yeah, and just so we're all on the same page here, why don't we enumerate the four violets in the Sherlock Holmes canon, just so we're all kind of, as I said, on the same page here and an even keel.
Yes.
So the first violet that we encounter in the canon, I believe, is in the Copper Beeches. That's one you're familiar with, right?
Oh, absolutely. And that's Violet Hunter, who is looking for a position as a governess and goes to Westways and winds up in the home of the somewhat odd Jeffro Rucastle.
That's right. And then in The Solitary Cyclist, we found the erstwhile Violet Smith, who rides her bicycle from the train station to, I can't think of the name of the house. Well, at any rate, it was where Bob Carruthers and his daughter were set up, where
Right.
Violet...
Is that Merripet House? Is that where she's
No,
going?
Merripet House is in The Hound of the Baskervilles.
Oh, that's right.
But Violet Smith, of course, was a piano teacher, and she took charge of young Miss Carruthers, while old Carruthers and Mr. Woodley tried to woo her. And that is one of the reasons that she went to Sherlock Holmes.
Yes. And then, of course, there's Violet Demervil, and Violet Demervil, of course, is in the adventure of it's the illustrious client,
that's
but
right.
but it's really the adventure of the evil Baron Gruner.
Yes, indeed. And she was icy and unable to be moved, even with the evidence that Holmes had in hand. And then finally, we reach the Bruce Partington plans, and we find Violet Westbury, who was the fiancée of Arthur Cadogan West, who himself was found dead on the railway tracks. That kind of kicked off the adventure. He had some plans in his pocket, and Violet Westbury knew he wasn't a traitor and wanted Holmes and Watson to restore his honor. So those are the four violets. And what's interesting here, Sonia Featherston wrote this article in the Baker Street Journal in 1997, volume 47, number 3, about the language of violets. And she does a really remarkable job of setting up the world in which Conan Doyle lived and some of the books and publications that he would have been familiar with, and how there was a particular form of communication that was beginning to evolve at that point called florigraphy. Or florography, depending on where you're from.
You need a fluoroscope, though, for that. It's not everybody can get into that because, of course, the power drain is significant. Yeah.
That is true. Well, before we get deflowered here by folks who do not like our wordplay, you'll recall at some point in your life of having heard that certain flowers stand for something, like a red rose signifies love, or a white rose signifies friendship, for example. Of course, honeysuckle is generous and devoted affection, and jasmine is I attach myself to you. So these are all kinds of terminologies and associations that really began under the work of Kate Greenaway. What do we know about Kate Greenaway?
Well, quite a bit, but it's not clear. Kate Greenaway did a wonderful job of tidying up and presenting all of this as a topic. But in her paper, Sonia points out that in England in the 1880s and 1890s, people were busy developing new violet and pansy hybrids. And there were conferences, actually, she says, in 1894 and 5 and 6 at the Botanical Gardens, Birmingham, and then in Regent's Park, all about all of this, breakthroughs in hybridization and so on. And so she gets into the difference between violets and African violets and pansies and talks about all of this. But Kate Greenaway was an author and illustrator, born in 1846, and captured all of this in her best-selling book, as you point out, The Language of Flowers, which was produced, really, Sonia says, at the height of Greenaway's popularity. She was the daughter of a London-based draftsman and an engraver, and she began her career by illustrating note cards and calendars and other people's books, including books of poetry by Robert Browning. And she had a series of almanacs and things like that. And, she had a great, her illustrations had a great imprint on Victorian sensibility and on style and so on. And so Language of Flowers was really a catalog of 700 flowers or more and their sentimental connotations, along with wonderful illustrations that were some of Greenaway's most exquisite work.
Indeed. And among these are illustrations of violets, which is what gets us to this particular topic. And she cites 4 different variations in violets. And we won't get into all of the specific genus and varieties that violets and their sub-varieties have, but we'll just say that she identified 4 and their significance. There was the blue violet, the dame violet, the sweet violet, and the yellow violet. And each had an attribute or significance. The blue violet was faithfulness. The dame violet was watchfulness. The sweet violet was modesty. And the yellow violet was rural happiness. I thought that was an interesting one. Rural happiness. Well, we will get into exactly how these particular violets are associated with the violets of the canon right after this quick word. One of the legacies that former head of the Baker Street Irregulars, Mike Whalen, left us is the BSI Press. The BSI Press has published more than 60 volumes related to Sherlock Holmes. These include the manuscript series, which provides facsimile editions of manuscripts and other documents relating to Sherlock Holmes and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, along with insightful commentary by talented Sherlockian and Doylean writers. The latest is a masterpiece of villainy, which is a look at the Norwood Builder. The BSI Profession series examines roles played by various professions in the Sherlockian canon: law, medicine, military, education, and now music in Referring to My Notes. And the BSI International series that makes available Sherlockian scholarship in English from various countries around the world. Head on over to BakerStreetIrregulars.com and browse around the BSI Press section. There's something there for everyone. All right, we're back, and we're about to explore the 4 violets. As we said, they are Violet Hunter, Violet Smith, Violet Demervil, and Violet Westbury. And we're going to examine them specifically as Sonia does, against the backdrop of the significance of the 4 violets. So, Sonia assigns 1 violet to each, to each violet, to each flower. But I had kind of gone down the list myself, and in my mind developed what I thought was a good reason for a particular character violet to be associated with this, with each flower violet, and they didn't necessarily match with Sonia's reasoning. I wondered how you made out.
Oh, I made out well because I'd never thought of it.
Yeah, well done.
And although, I think her first labeling here, again, this is sort of blue violet, dame violet, sweet violet, yellow violet, and these various characteristics.
Faithfulness, watchfulness, modesty, yes. Rural happiness.
Rural happiness. Yeah, so I would think Violet Hunter, whom she aligns with the Dame Violet of watchfulness, makes sense, although she begins by pointing out that Violet Hunter is the only one of the 4 violets in the canon who has no male entanglements. And while that's obviously true, it didn't seem to me to be have any particular influence on her character. But she does point out and reminds us that Holmes was favorably impressed by her, that Violet Hunter was intelligent and direct and can think on her feet, as she says. However, she says, Violet is not as confident as Watson would have us believe, because in the case, she twice admits that events have driven her to her wit's end, and she's very nervous about making a sacrifice of her hair, and she's very vain about it. She has a great memory for details, says Sonia, and an ability to see and recall events and surroundings and conversations, which she recounts verbatim, conveniently. She uses this concealed mirror, to glance over her shoulder and out the window in that great scene in the case. So Sonia wraps it up and says, for her watchfulness, we can link her with the Dame Violet. And that seems appropriate.
That does. I buy that. And just on the face of it, when I thought through the Violets and thought where they were situated and how they were getting along, I associated Violet Hunter with rural happiness. And at least that's how it started out in the Copper Beeches. It seemed like, she was being paid above market wages. She only had one child after whom to look. She was, at this estate, the Copper Beeches. Everything seemed to be going well, with the exception of having to cut her hair and put on a strange dress. But and then it kind of all went sideways. So, rural happiness could have been just a completely ironic use of Violet in that case.
Well, that's true.
Anyway, and then we move on to Violet Smith. And this was an easy one for me. I absolutely thought of Violet Smith in terms of modesty. She was being pursued by both Carruthers and Woodley. But even the mention of her beloved Cyril, who is her fiancé, makes her blush uncontrollably. It was a woman who certainly did not appreciate the attention that she was getting, and certainly sought out the assistance of Holmes and Watson to save her from this unwanted and unwarranted attention. So, as Sonia writes, she's the sweet Violet, the one who represents the quality of modesty.
Yeah, well done.
Yeah.
And then, moving on to Violet Westbury, Sonia says, it's tempting to link Violet Westbury's name with the renowned Westbury Court garden in Gloucestershire. And the canon doesn't provide us really with any information about her. We can infer that she's considerate and trusting and honest as the day is long. And when Holmes and Watson meet her after she's been questioned by the police, she's caring for poor old Arthur Cadogan West's grief-dazed mother, and she's in shock. And it's amazing, too, that, dealing with all of that, with Arthur's mother and with her own loss, she appeals to Sherlock Holmes to save his honor. She's concerned about Arthur Cadogan West's honor. And therefore, she's the blue Violet, says Sonia, the one who stands for faithfulness. And I think that's very appropriate.
Yeah, I would buy that one too. And full disclosure, I was thinking of this Violet in terms of watchfulness. She was paying attention to what happened. She was part and parcel of some of the state secrets there, but she was looking out for her dead fiancé in terms of watchfulness. So that's the way I had initially associated her with that. So, and then we come to the final lady in Watson's bouquet, Violet Demervil, is the daughter of General Demervil. Of course, she falls in love with Baron Gruner, and she is immovable when it comes to changing her opinion about the nefarious Baron. She won't even listen to Kitty, who herself is living proof of Gruner's evil ways, and she's just obsessed with Bruner. But we learn one pertinent fact about Violet. writes Sonia. She's an outdoors woman. She met Gruner on a yachting trip. I don't know if yachting makes you an outdoors woman, but she says even her French surname evokes the wind and the waves. She appreciates nature. In the midst of her tension-ridden interview with Holmes, she remarks on the twitter of those birds outside the window. So that eventually leads us to what Sonia again writes about Violet's marriage to Gruner never taking place, because she finds out the truth because of Gruner's diary. And to escape whispers, maybe she retired from London to the quiet countryside. Greenaway's yellow violet symbolizes the rural happiness we would wish her to find after the Gruner affair.
Well, it's very poetic on Sonia's part to say that, to align this particular violet with this very hopeful association. But it's also probably because there was no example of a stubborn violet, one that sort of dug their roots in and wouldn't move, and pushed aside some other plants along the way. And that's probably why.
It was a dandelion violet, yeah. And that's why I was thinking of Violet Demervil as one who represented faithfulness, and her faithfulness to Baron Gruner. That was how I reasoned it, at least.
Oh, well, that's a pretty good reason. Yeah. I like that. Yeah. Well, and then, Sonia wraps it up. She says, there's a single clear source she finds for what Kate Greenaway developed as a fascination with violets. And so she points to Greenaway's mentor, which was John Ruskin, the art critic and the educator. And she says, when Ruskin died, Kate Greenaway, the artist and illustrator, plunged into mourning, and she wrote of her shock and sent to Ruskin's cousin a note that said, I've sent a little bunch of violets, and Ruskin and I had so many associations with them. I feel he would have liked me to send that. And I thought that's a very nice thing that Sonia points out. And she also points out there are plenty of other floral names in the canon, rose, spender for one, but the violets are unique because of their youth and their beauty and their vulnerability and their personalities that leave a really deep impression on the reader.
Yeah, and she says where the name Violet came from and why it appears exactly 4 times has provoked Sherlockians long enough. Simply, Watson was influenced by the 4 blooms in Greenaway's popular florigraphy book, and Greenaway was influenced by Ruskin, his love of the flower, and the little girls who paid him court at Brantwood. So she says the next time you're at a flower show, linger with me while the genus Viola judging takes place. You'll root for your favorite variety of belted show pansy. You know the one. It's got a yellow ground and plum belting, the one with a wicked and wonderful name, the John Watson. And that actually is a name of a variety of violet. So.
Well, that is a lovely direction that Sonia has planted in our minds. But that's just a trifle.
All right, and before we end the show, we promised that we would do our drawing. This is from all of our Patreon supporters. Again, if you would like to support the show and be eligible for these drawings, simply go to patreon.com/trifles or just hit the Patreon link in our show notes. And in this case, we are doing a drawing once again for a back issue of the Baker Street Journal. So you can enjoy some of the pieces like Sonia Featherston's work on the 4 violets here. So let's pull out the big prize wheel and give it a spin. Watching it go around, coming to land on random number 25. 25. And that corresponds to David Fiore. We roused our audience from sleep there, David. David, congratulations. We will be getting a back issue of the Baker Street Journal in the mail to you.
It is, of course, a trifle, but there is nothing so important as trifles.
Please join us again next week for another installment of Trifles. Show notes are available on SherlockHolmesPodcast.com. Please subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and be sure to check out our longer show, I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, where we interview notable Sherlockians and share news of the Sherlockian world.
You've taken my breath away, Mr. Holmes.
Sorry, too much violence.
But I like violence.
You like violence? You mean you like explosions? Trees falling? People being hit in the head?
No, I like violence 'cause they smell so nice.